Can India afford its diplomatic tightrope walk of Russia's invasion of Ukraine any longer? I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. Our focus today is on the aftermath of the Russian bombing of Kyiv. If we can bring up those pictures now, the world is looking at the devastation, but also Putin's clear provocative escalation of the conflict. Joe Biden is warning of a possible nuclear conflict. And as those images hit the global headlines, what we here in India are asking is whether our position needs to shift and shift dramatically. It, of course, is a position that has altered and evolved over time. The government has expressed its concern at this increase in escalation and has also voted to reject Russia's demand for a secret ballot at the United Nations. But is that enough? Or is India going to continue to be guided by our own national interest? Where is this conflict headed? And how much attention should we pay to the American president's words saying that the chance of a nuclear conflagration cannot be underestimated? This, as India's foreign minister on global stages calls out repeatedly what he sees as Western hypocrisy, whether it is on military procurement or the import of Russian oil. So a lot to unpack here with a panel of experts. Let's introduce them one by one. Dr. Aisha Ray, political scientist based out of the United States, is joining us. Suhasini Haidar, one of our finest diplomatic journalists, an editor with The Hindu, is with us. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, veteran diplomat, is with us. Good to see you, sir. Also joining us from the United States today, we're pleased to have with us David Frum. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic. Good to see you, David. And finally joining us is a former Director General of Infantry, General Rameshwar Yadav. Very, very happy to see all of you. If I may start actually by setting the tone with Foreign Minister Jaishankar's comments, these comments made in response to persistent questions about India's dependence on Russia for military weapons and whether that, in fact, is holding back India's unequivocal condemnation of Russia. This is what the Foreign Minister said. Listen in.
With regard to India and Russia, we have really a long-standing relationship with Russia. A relationship that has certainly served our interests well. When you asked about the military equipment issue, we have, as you know, a substantial inventory of Soviet and Russian origin weapons. And that inventory actually grew for a variety of reasons. You know, the merits of the weapon systems themselves, but also because for multiple decades, Western countries did not supply weapons to India, and in fact saw a military dictatorship next to us as the preferred partner. So I think we all in international politics deal with what we have. We make judgments which are reflective of both our future interests as well as our current situation.
Will that change now? Repeatedly, there is a section of public opinion that has argued that India is on the wrong side of history. But Foreign Minister Jaishankar's comments on the global stage do earn applause back home. Western hypocrisy is a trope that has come to shape India's foreign policy. Can that continue? Ambassador Prakash, I'll start with you. Much has shifted. You have the American president talking about possible nuclear conflict, though those remarks had to be dialed down a bit after he first made them. You have the bombing of Kyiv. You have Putin clearly escalating this conflict, and you have India now not abstaining, but actually rejecting Russia's call for a secret ballot at the UN when that comes up for vote. Your thoughts, sir? Can we afford this tightrope walk anymore?
Barkha, greetings. I don't see what you see, Barkha. Where is the tightrope walking? It is our stand, the core of our stand is intact, that the unity and territorial integrity and sovereignty has to be maintained. We have continued to be respectful. We have not used shrill language or condemnatory language. If shrill language or strong words were to win a side over, then North Korea would have been the champion of swinging things in its way. we continue to be respectful, yet our position has evolved because of what we see on ground. So there is absolutely no ambiguity. There is absolutely no tightrope walking. We are using our own language. We do understand the Queen's English a bit. The difference, Barkha, is that, you tell a guy you're bad, or you tell a guy that there is scope for improvement. Now, we have chosen to use that, the other part, to say that, well, there is a scope for improvement, but the message is loud and clear. What has evolved is that we have now we have gone public, as you saw the Prime Minister do in Samarkand. But other than that, our position is absolutely clear. I do not see any ambiguity. I don't see any tightrope walking. Yes, we are using our own language instead of taking a dictation from anybody else, Barkha.
And if I may take that to David, the language of President Biden is quite different. Maybe it has something to do with midterm polls that are coming up. But if Ambassador Vishnu Prakash references India's very sort of careful construction of language, subtle, sophisticated, nuanced, I think is what Indian diplomats would argue, Biden is actually talking about a possible nuclear conflict. His minders have had to dial back some of those comments since then. What is the view from Washington today after the bombing of Kyiv, and where do you see this going, David?
I think President Biden's comments were misplaced. President Biden, over his long career in American politics, is famous for not always weighing his words carefully. He's very unlike Barack Obama that way, and sometimes this habit of blurting things has served him well. He became a leader in the fight for marriage equality and same-sex marriage by saying on a TV program when he was Vice President Obama, before Obama, that he was in favor of it, which is something he should not have done, but that advanced the discussion. But in this case, Biden was at a fundraiser. He believed he was off the record, and he indulged himself in a moment of dramatic speech but it was really unwise, and it actually repeated and affirmed a talking point that the Russians are using that is not true. We are not near a nuclear conflagration. And when you begin, and I've done this in some of my writing and in my Twitter feed, when you begin to war game, what precisely would attacking Ukraine with a nuclear weapon, that's what we're talking about, do for Russia from its own point of view? Because this chess match has no good outcome for them. What is going to deter Russia is the same thing that deterred the USSR before them, which is Western capabilities and their own survival instinct.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I want to take that to Suhasini. I mean, two very sort of different perspectives, given one is from Delhi and one is from Washington. But David does make the point that Biden's rhetoric did not actually help de-escalate anything and probably plays into a Russian script. But Suhasini, Ambassador Prakash doesn't see a tightrope. The West sees only one right side in this conflict. What do you see?
Well, I certainly see it maybe not as much a tightrope, but we are seeming to walk and talk in two different directions at the same time. What does it mean when the External Affairs Minister says, as you played out, that we have very old relationships with Russia? Russia gave us weaponry when the West did not give us weaponry. Is he essentially saying that India is tied by that and that we are in some way helpless to criticize Russia? Because I do believe that this defense hardware relationship is a two-way thing. So for the government to use that as some kind of an excuse for not saying what has been plain to everybody for the last 8 months, which is that Russia has chosen, for whatever reason, however valid its reasons may be, but it has chosen to bomb civilians day after day, to carry out attacks on areas including near nuclear installations, and has not really listened to any kind of voices to go back to the dialogue table. I can say that neither has the Ukrainian side. It is a strange position we're in, where even diplomats are saying we don't really see a purpose in talks at the moment. But I don't think that the Indian position is either clear nor unambiguous, and nor is it, honestly speaking, consistent. Because if at one point we are trying to say that we're taking a principled position, that we believe in the UN Charter, that we believe in a lack of sovereignty, why have we abstained from 15 votes at the United Nations that actually seek only to criticize Russia for this, for the violation of territorial sovereignty. If, on the other hand, we are worried, as the External Affairs Minister seems to suggest in what I can only call a very cynical comment, that Russia is an old partner and therefore we cannot say anything to them, then why are we saying things like the era of war is over? So I don't see a consistency. I don't even, actually, you're right. It's not even really a tightrope. We seem to be speaking in several directions all at once and hoping that nobody is actually going to ask us to choose.
Okay, Ambassador Prakash, briefly, I do want to go to the others. Do go ahead, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that what Dr. Jaishankar said has to be seen in the context. The question was, is India rethinking the relationship with Russia? Are we going to review the performance of the Russian weapon systems, and are we going to reduce the reliance on Russian weapons? That was the question. So we have to see the answer in a context. And what Dr. Jaishankar said was a fact, that we were denied weaponry by the West, that we have a long-standing relationship, that we have a inventory is growing. I mean, I don't think it's anybody's case that if your 60% of the weaponry is Russian, we should just throw it out of the window and start anew. So I think we are linking two things which were not there, and this was only in a certain context.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to hold you, Swati, just for a second, because I just have a question to David and General Yadav and Dr. Aisha Ray are both waiting. David, is there a kind of George Bush-like you are with us or against us mood building up in DC? And if so, India's clearly not playing ball. Washington has to accept it for now because there's China at the other end, which incidentally voted on the side of Russia on its demand for the secret ballot. Indians are most concerned that the West has always, in a way, partnered with Pakistan. The recent sale of F-16s to Pakistan has caused a great amount of anxiety here in India. So just wanted your thoughts on that before I go to General Yadav.
Well, may I just make a point about an optical illusion that Indians may have about this relationship? That you've talked about your historic relationship with Russia. You didn't have one. You had a historic relationship with the Soviet Union, of which Ukraine was a successor state. And so if your claim is that we owe something to Russia because it was the Soviets who supplied us with arms in the 60s and 70s, those arms were probably made in what is now Ukraine. That was the center of the old Soviet weapons industry. I mean, you should buy whatever weapons make sense for you. I think we're having a test of concept right now about whose weapons are of higher quality and higher reliability. And when you choose your weapon supplier, I would think you would want to do so not for diplomatic reasons, but to get the best weapons for the money. I don't think there's a sense in Washington of this is a global struggle in which everybody must be counted. This is clearly a struggle focused in the European theater. But there are some principles here that I think Indians really ought to be wary of. If it's true, for example, that a relatively weak state backed with nuclear weapons gets away with it, aggressing upon neighbors, taking territory, and then using nuclear weapons to deter them, you have a nuclear-armed, weaker neighbor. They are watching this story. And the other thing that I think Indians would want to keep in mind is this war is going very badly for Russia. They are on the way to a defeat of greater or lesser proportions. It is very possible that leaves them as more a client state of China than ever, a huge Indian security concern. And the effect of weakening Russia may be to reinforce China. So India has its own reasons for wanting to see the European continent restabilized with a successful European Union, including a successful Ukraine, but also Russia offered a way back to the community of nations. And the only way to get Russia back into the community of nations is to have a clear end to the war, a peace treaty, the end of sanctions, which must be paid for with Russian reparations. If you get a frozen conflict, which is where this is going, where Russia's beaten but not reconciled, there will be no end to sanctions, no reunion of Russia with the world economy, and a huge reinforcement of Chinese power.
Yes, the idea of Russia as left as a sort of vassal state of China is indeed a frightening thought. General Yadav, if I'm hoping that you can hear me, I want to bring you in. The Stimson Center recently had an appraisal that 70% of India's military platforms have a Russia link. Our dependence on Russian arms has gone down, but we're still heavily dependent on Russia for arms procurement, leading Jaishankar to make the comment that he did about Western hypocrisy. How do you see this, given that, as David just said, there is no good outcome for Russia in this conflict? Russia isn't going to win this war. Are we siding with the loser?
Oh, very interesting question. Barkha, you see, we have got 70% dependency on Russia, correct? And
Yeah.
especially when we analyze, it is our offensive content that the Indian Air Force and the mechanized forces, they have the Russian equipment. And now even in our ordnance factories, which are manufacturing this equipment, they all have the Russian designs, and we depend on Russia for the spares. So if that supply chain is disrupted, it is going to create a lot of problems for us. And now you see we have two live borders. One side is Pakistan, other side is China. China is sitting in eastern Ladakh for last more than 1 year. So what do? We possibly cannot cut off our supply line, and moreover, Russia has been a very dependent partner with us. If you go back to 1971, what happened? You see, when American aircraft carrier had come into Bay of Bengal, it was a pressure by Russia that had bailed us out. So Russia has stood by India in all the possible adverse contingencies. So that is one kind of a relationship that we have, and we possibly do not want to disturb them. This is what a foreign minister is talking about. Now coming to the other part, what America is doing with the Pakistan, they seem to be getting cozy with them. Why don't we look at it from strategic point of view? You see, US is concerned about China. That is the main challenge, and China has got China-Pak economic corridors going through Pakistan. So
But
probably
aren't we concerned about China as well? We have China inside our territory to varying degrees of official admission in eastern Ladakh. We know that China is playing with our land boundaries, with our territorial integrity. Why aren't
absolutely.
we concerned about China?
Absolutely. We are concerned about China, and we have to keep our powder dry. Any day, anything can happen. China is so unpredictable, and they have got political hubris. They had come in last year, but they do not know how to go back. They're looking for a face-saving mechanism, and that can only be possible when they're seen to be moving back from a position of strength. And we are giving them no such kind of facility at all. And as for American aid to Pakistan is concerned, yes, it is a point that it concerns us, but it is not a matter of a very big concern that we have to be unnecessarily perturbed about it. It may well be to check China and Chinese and Pakistani relationship. It has
Okay.
got Pakistan and Afghan relationship. US wants to dominate,
So
continue
you believe
dominate
sorry,
Afghanistan
I'm
also.
sorry, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. In short, you believe that Russia has been more dependable a partner than the United States of America is, if I may summarize you a little bit oversimply. And let me take that to Dr. Aisha Ray. Aisha, you have argued from the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine that India needed to have taken a principled position. For that, you may be called a romantic. There are people in India who would point to the fact that the United States of America does not now, for several months, even have an ambassador representing the country. It is a relationship that many Indians believe has been diplomatically ignored. The sale of F-16s, the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan seems to have created old new dependencies by Washington on Pakistan. And there's a deep cynicism as to why indeed India should take one or the other position when it doesn't suit us. What would you say?
Barkha, can you hear me? Thanks for having me very much on your show. To be fair to the foreign minister, he is right about Western hypocrisy when it comes to, giving arms to countries like Pakistan. I mean, we've seen Western hypocrisy or US hypocrisy in his relationship with Saudi Arabia. These are regimes that are definitely, not savory regimes, yet the United States tends to maintain relations with it. However, India has built over 20 plus years a very strong defense partnership, a strong strategic partnership with the United States. which I think cannot be just tossed out of the window. As a liberal democracy, both countries have some very common areas of concern, whether it is the rise of China or whether it is terrorism in the subcontinent. There are many areas, and particularly now in the Indo-Pacific, both countries have a lot at stake. So in this dual game of which partner is the better one, I would definitely say that the United States offers many more benefits to India strategically, particularly because Russia is now this sort of an autocratic crony capitalist state. It's not the former Soviet Union. So that's one very important distinction that India should make. And I think India shouldn't build its decisions purely based on what the West thinks or the West does with other countries, but on its own position, on its own. So Jaishankar says he's with the UN Charter. India stands with the UN Charter, but the UN Charter clearly says that invasion of a country and territorial integrity and sovereignty of a nation has to be upheld, right? We haven't condemned Russia in any clear terms. So what does that mean? And so there are so many contradictions in that, in these statements that, again, along with the abstentions, make it very difficult to kind of pin down what India truly is.
Yeah, so Hasani, some would say that last point that Aisha made, that you can't actually tell what the position is smart diplomacy, that it is agile, it is responding to a shifting position. That is exactly what diplomats are meant to do. They're meant to leave other nations guessing. We are not anyone's ally. We're multi-aligned, all aligned, but no one side's ally is the argument that we hear all the time. Is not specifically knowing India's position smart diplomacy?
Well, I certainly think that if India keeps both sides guessing, it does help, because had India gone very clearly in one direction, perhaps the other side would not have tried to, if you like, quote unquote, woo India over to its position. One part of this, Barkha, is what India is doing at the United Nations, which, as you pointed out, is slightly confused, or confusing, I should say. Although I would argue that India's votes have been in one direction, even when its explanation of votes have been in the other direction. So in its explanation of votes, India says all kinds of the right, makes all kinds of the right noises, says everything, and then it goes and abstains. So clearly, if I were to say India is voting with its feet, but speaking a very different language when it comes to the explanation of vote, but where we don't see any ambiguity and no hesitation at all, has been on the very curious case of India's purchase of Russian oil. We are now looking at Russian oil that has grown, multiple times. Some say 40%, some say 50%, some say it has gone from 2% of our oil imports to 22%, probably 25% by the end of the year. We have seen Russia go from being not even in the top 10 or 15 of our suppliers to being number 2 for the last couple of months. And we have heard the External Affairs Minister as well as the Petroleum Minister say very clearly, India will go and get oil from wherever it can. Now, we know that that's not the truth, because India did stop taking oil from Iran and Venezuela when the Trump administration made a big noise about it. But it has very clearly chosen in this particular case to take a stand that it is going to continue to buy oil from Russia. And actually, the petroleum minister even said that nobody has asked India to reduce it. So what I'm trying to say is, while there are areas where, as you said, India has left room for change, and some call it an evolving position, some say the emphasis is changing in what India is talking about, I think there are some places where India has spoken very clearly.
Yeah, I do want to pick up this bit on the oil imports for both Ambassador Prakash and to David, because Ambassador Prakash, first you. In April of this year, the foreign minister famously told his then counterpart, Liz Truss, now the United Kingdom's prime minister, that Europe purchases more gas from Russia in an hour than India does in a month. But if you look at the data now, as Suhasini pointed out, Russia has become India's second largest crude supplier, I think, after Saudi Arabia. that increase in oil imports is at least fivefold in the period of July to August. And the ministers of our government are saying this is what is owed to the citizens. Is this oil that is financing in some ways or funding Russia's war? That is the common allegation that we hear. Ambassador Prakash. Ambassador Prakash, can you hear me?
I can, but my mic is muted.
Yeah, no, it's unmuted now, sir. Do go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, you're right, Barkha. It is only the Indian oil purchase that is funding the Russian war. You're absolutely right, because that
I'm
dollar
not saying that.
No,
I just want to explain you're being funny and ironic.
I'm in a very simple person. So yes, you're right, because the European oil purchase goes towards charity. The oil purchases from other countries is kosher. Nobody is scared to ask whether oil is a proscribed item. Is oil a proscribed item? No, it is not. When India buys it, I mean, some experts feel very jumpy about it and say, "Oh, why is India buying it?" I mean, question is, why should India not buy it? I think this is a discussion that is all passed over. It is past the use date, so I'm not going to get into that. I would like to thank one of your panelists for giving us a one-on-one on geopolitics, because we did not know that we should be buying or not buying or using arms in our interest, or so on and so forth. But, I think the problem here at the moment, as I see it, is that this panel has already formed the decision, or the judgment has already been taken, that India is guilty. So once that judgment is taken, or the verdict is passed, I think there's nothing much to say, because where is the ambiguity? For the life of me, do not see the ambiguity. If India were to be, would only be looking at the arms that we possess, would the Prime Minister tell President Putin on his face that this is not the time for conflict? I think there are two issues which are very different. The arms issue is important. The shelf life of any defense platform is 30 to 40 years. We have to use that. At the same time, our imports from the US have surged to $20 billion. It is increasing. India has taken a position which is principled, which is independent. I do not see why we are linking one with the other, because there is no linkage unless you decide that there is a linkage. So I'm completely in disagreement with some of the views that have been expressed, but that is me. I mean, what do I know of the real world?
Okay, let me just push back a little bit here. Of your irony and your sort of what should I say, sarcasm is well taken. Of course, that hypocrisy, Ambassador Prakash, of the Europeans buying the oil, that, as you said, why is only India asked to explain that purchase of oil, is a valid one. But to Suhasini's point of the manifold increase, I want your understanding of that.
What is wrong with that? Tell me. I don't see anything wrong with that. We get cheaper oil. We are a developing country. We are highly dependent on oil imports. Our developmental agenda is at stake. We are getting oil which is cheaper by $30. It is not a proscribed item, and we buy it. I mean, I would rather that we buy even more. I don't see anything wrong with that. If it is prescribed by the UN, or if there is an embargo or a ban on it, it's a different matter. I think this is a contrived complaint, and I have nothing to do with it.
Suhasini, briefly, and then I'll go to David and generally other. Yeah.
Only to ask that, of course, India must buy oil where it can find the best rates for it. But then the question, why then did we give up? Why did we forego Iranian oil, Venezuelan oil? Iranian oil, as you know better than anyone else, much more suited to our refineries, much closer geographically as well. So if we are talking about the idea that India should be able to go and buy oil from anywhere, then why not also restore those?
Okay, I'll let Vishnu Prakash come in briefly, and I really do have to go to the others then. Ambassador Prakash, yes.
No, I'll be very, very brief. At that time, we could not afford to not buy to buy it. Today, we can afford to buy it. Simple.
Yeah. And I want to bring in David at this point. David, the United States of America is currently negotiating with the Iranians and the Venezuelans so that the market is flooded with other sources of oil. These are sanctions then that would be rolled back. looking at this, again, Indians would say, you see, this is why India has to be clinically guided by a government's own duty to its citizens. As Indian ministers have repeatedly said, if Russian oil is cheaper, if that benefits our citizens, why shouldn't we? Why is India being singled out and repeatedly being asked? The foreign minister is asked this irrespective of which country he goes to on the purchase of oil from Russia in a way that the European nations are simply not asked to account for.
Yeah. I think this discussion about fairness and standards misses the point from an Indian point of view. There's really, I think, if I were Indian, I'd be thinking about one big question, which is, does India want to be part of the peace settlement after this conflict ends? That in India right now, as everyone has been agreeing, has been an effective, maybe not always rhetorical, but an effective operating ally of the country that is heading toward a pretty serious defeat. A defeat after which it will find itself more economically dependent on China. There will someday have to be some kind of settlement, because we're going to have to find some way to let Russia out of these sanctions that are so crushing to the Russian economy. When that conversation comes, where does India want its chair to be set at which table? Right now, you're choosing a particular table. There are other tables, and so this is not a matter of of ideals or of standards or historical relationships. It's a matter of where do you see your future, and we are going to have, at the end of this war, very likely a big change in world politics. The European Union is going to emerge enlarged, more powerful, more cohesive. China is going to emerge more powerful. Russia is going to emerge weaker. And the question is, where will India be in this new alignment? I worked in the Bush administration, and we were very excited then by the increasing intimacy of the U.S.-India relationship, that it looked like this was a big reinforcement to the strength of the democratic world, that it would, there are intense people-to-people ties between India and the United States, there are intense commercial ties, there could be strategic ties as well to make sure that the competition with China is managed in a peaceful way. But India has to make decisions about its own future. And even if you are not acknowledging to yourself that you are making those decisions, you are making those decisions.
Yeah. Interesting question there. Let me bring in General Yadav. Where does India want to be when this conflict actually ends? Does India want to be part of that group of nations that is mediating the future? There have even been calls for India to play a mediatory role in this conflict, General Yadav. Let's bring you in, sir.
You see, our Prime Minister has already declared, and our Foreign Office also declared, that we are ready for any kind of contribution that we can give to bring about peace in the subcontinent. And the tenets are very clear. They said the sovereignty of Ukraine has got to be respected. So by that way, if we look at it, so we are trying to convey a very positive message to the world, and we have a very good relationship with Russia as well as Ukraine. And India can play a very good role in bringing about both the warring parties together to come to some kind of a reconciliation. And then reconciliation, the condition could be probably first thing first is declare a ceasefire, and thereafter the Russian forces, they must go back to their own territory, that is the line of 23 Feb, beginning of this year. And thereafter they can negotiate something which is amicable and acceptable to both the parties.
Yeah. And would you like to add your voice before I go to Aisha on the sort of dependence for arms as well as oil on Russia? Of course, Ambassador Prakash has very archly said that these questions, India singles them out. David Frum argues that to constantly see this conflict through the prism of fair play is missing the larger strategic interests that India must aim towards. General Yadav.
You see, we are in a market economy. And as far as the market economy is concerned, we have freedom as a sovereign country to go to whichever market that we are getting advantage. We are purchasing arms from US, we are purchasing arms and ammunition from France and Israel and so many other countries. Russia is one part of our package. So linking and attaching some political links to energy purchases or the arms purchase, I think it will be incorrect for a country like India, which follows an independent foreign policy, and we are non-aligned by aligning with everybody. We have got very good relationship with most of the countries in the world. Then this is what our political strength as of now.
Yeah. Aisha, Jairam Ramesh, now with the Congress party, had this famous phrase that, most Indians had a kind of dual attitude to the United States of America, which is Yankee, go home, but take me with you. Do you feel that there's a kind of intuitive anti-Americanism that, so when Jaishankar goes on the world stage making some very valid points about hypocrisy, everybody goes, yay. But in some ways, if you ask this generation of Indians, where are India's interests more aligned, with Russia or the US, everybody would say with the US. There is this kind of public duality also that the government is probably factoring in when it navigates its positions.
Probably that could be. I mean, that could be the case. But I wanted to respond to Ambassador Prakash's comments, or just sort of a general tenor of some of the comments, where I think a lot of weight is being placed on the Indian Prime Minister's words about how this is not the era for war. Clearly, Putin's actions do not demonstrate that he cares about those sorts of principles. I mean, he's just launched multiple strikes, on several of the key cities in Ukraine. He's regularly making nuclear threats. In fact, he's amping up the nuclear threat. Now, one area I think where India has definitely, I think, tried to make its position clear is on the nuclear issue, where it's while it's not condemned Russia directly, it still said that nuclear threats are alarming and things to that end, right? That nuclear threats shouldn't be made and things like that. So I think that's the only area where India is probably concerned and should be concerned. But I think too much weight should be placed on what the Indian ministers say, because I don't think Russian leaders are factoring that in. Russian leaders are purely waging this war of annexation based on identity politics, based on imperial sort of a land grab, revanchism, and so many aspects that are central to understanding Russia and not so much the other countries around it.
And yet, David, and after that, I do have to take closing comments from Suhasini and Ambassador Prakash. And yet, David, I think the Indian sort of diplomatic corps would calculate that India is needed right now by all of the protagonists in this script. The Americans need us as a countervailing force to the rise of China, which is why India is able to do the Quad as well as go to the SCO summit and then meet with Putin and make a comment about this not being the era of war. And that is something that Ambassador Prakash says is not a tightrope. It is simply deft diplomacy.
India is a major and rising power in the world. Obviously, it's going to be a huge factor in the politics of the 21st century. But we are going to have a big discussion at the end of this impending Russian defeat. And I think many in India may be kidding themselves about how much they are seen as an honest broker and how much they are seen as, in effect, a Russian economic ally. And if you're a Russian economic ally, you're not going to be a broker. And if your ally loses, you get less seat at a smaller table than if you are aligned with the sides that are likely going to win. Oil is going to be a declining factor in the world economy over the next 15 years. And Russian weapons are really second and even third rate. So as you make the decisions that you have to make, I think the Ukrainian cause is right and just, but if that doesn't move you, think about what is good for your own country as it rises on the world stage.
Yeah. So Hasni, I think that's an interesting question. Let's leave principle, because no country acts purely from sort of an abstract morality to principle when it comes to defining national self-interest. From our self-interest, are we on the right side?
Well, as I said, we're not quite clear because we do vote one way and then speak the other way, exactly which side we are at present. But this much is there, Barkha, that principles can be set aside, but not if you're going to take the principles stand. You can, the fact that the government has chosen so far to refuse to take a stand on the war in Russia, the Russian war in Ukraine, is essentially not a principled stand. So let's not talk about the principled stand over here. When it comes to India's own interests, and I think the government understands where India's interests lie, it doesn't have to be in this sort of zero-sum game that David seems to draw. Because I would remind him that at the UN General Assembly, 141 countries voted to criticize Russia for its actions in the Ukraine, but less than 40 countries are actually part of the sanctions. So I'm not sure that the world is divided into this allies and enemies kind of rhetoric right now. I think there is a case to be made for what India is doing. But I think at the same time, it is necessary for India to state its principles very clear, because as many have pointed out, India tends to want the world to understand its position. When it comes to China, when it comes to Pakistan, I don't think that there is a place for having this kind of dichotomy that the government has set out in the last few months without at some point someone accusing us of hypocrisy.
Ambassador Prakash, I'll give you the last word. Is this a sustainable position? Now, of course, the Indian position has not been static. It has evolved. It has evolved in leaps and bounds. But it's very, very, what's the word? Delicately poised. And at the moment, many would see us as siding with Russia. Where is this going from here?
Well, if anybody sees us siding with Russia, that is their choice, and good luck to them. I can say categorically that we are not an ally of Russia. Anybody who wants to be objective has just to see how India-US relationship has grown. The relationship has been transformed. Look at the last 20 years, the quality of India-Russia relations and India-US relationship. India-US relationship is a relationship of the future. Somebody was saying there is a contradiction. There is absolutely no contradiction. Yes, there could be. We are in different geographies. We are in different stages of economic development. We could have differences which are healthy, but we are articulating them. The positive balance sheet of the relationship is humongous. And when it comes to the future, let us be very clear. India stands with one country for when it comes to the future. That is called India. We know what is in our interest, and our interests are not contradictory with those of the Western world, because that's the relationship we are building, whether it's with the US, whether it's with Europe. Yes, but at the same time, we have tried to put across a point of view in a non-confrontational manner. If that is not to the liking of somebody, so be it. Last point, Ukraine. We have been at the forefront in extending all kinds of assistance to Ukraine. That is on the record. Some 20 plane loads of assistance have been provided, and we continue to do so. So I think anybody who wants to comment on that should take the totality of the picture into consideration. But if that's difficult, I mean, we are not complaining. We will do what we need to do, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Ambassador Prakash David from Suhasini Haidar, Aisha Ray, and General Yadav. You know, intriguingly, foreign policy never really gets people agitated. It used to be only India-Pakistan strategic affairs discussions that led to that kind of passion. It's very, very interesting for us to see the kind of debate the Russia invasion of Ukraine has in fact triggered here in India. And I think that's a healthy sign for people to be more deeply engaged with geopolitics. Thank you very much, everybody. To our audience, see you tomorrow. Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.